Darling, now. Peter's been away so often of late. Tinkerbell held still, keeping her wings folded close between her shoulder blades so as not to give away any sense of rising consternation at the mermaid's idle comment. Yes, Peter had been to London frequently those days, or more accurately those nights, preferring, it seemed, to wait until darkness fell over the Lost Boys' den and Tink was presumed to be tucked safe in her walnut-shell bed frame. This was the problem with presumptions. They were so awfully, presumptuous, and the groundwork for many a coup. Hook knew this well. Once an Eton boy, after all, and had passed his knowledge along to Tink. Despite this, she had to acknowledge, in the moment, her creeping discomfort with the process. She pushed the thought away. You know where he's been. A spray of salt water splashed Tink's shoulders. The mermaid Shallan winnowed her way across the shallows of the main pool of Mermaid Lagoon, where Tink had been trying to enjoy the bright morning sun. It startled the fairy out of her anxious reverie, for which she was at least somewhat grateful, gooseflesh notwithstanding. Hook was notoriously foul-tempered before he'd taken his lunch, and as such, Tink tended to spend that time of day far from the decks of the Jolly Roger, even when Peter Pan's attentions were otherwise occupied, such as they were, yet again, that day. Hence the allure of Mermaid Lagoon. The creatures could be a bit much, frenetic, and darting as any gaggle of fairies, which Tink would not have thought possible were she not by then accustomed to it. But in that way, they were also comforting, an unexpected reminder of home. Tink shook her head. Don't be silly. A cascade of pixie dust fell with the chime of bells that the other mermaids by then could understand as her speech. Hook and Tink had fashioned a spell when she first arrived in Neverland, allowing others to understand her language. Tinkerbell, now, you have a secret, Shallan went on, a smirk pulling at the corners of her lips. Her hair, perennially the color of damp sand, no matter wet or dry, bobbed in its ponytail, no less perfectly pert for being waterlogged. If only you knew, Tink thought. She didn't have long to dwell on the thought, though. Suddenly a flurry of cooing erupted, and another series of splashes broke the surface of the water. Tinkerbell and Shallan turned toward the commotion. Look! Penelope pointed at a tiny speck in the sky. She cut through the water and, with a small flip of her tail, gracefully positioned herself at the top of a small cluster of rocks. Immediately she set to rearranging her starfish crown. Tink often thought that mermaids were perhaps the only creatures more vain than she was, and in that she was not at all mistaken. Tinkerbell squinted, and the figure came into sharper relief. A spry, well-muscled legs extended gracefully. One arm arched overhead like a dancer, the other swept out to catch the current. A flash of green came into focus, a tunic with a hem that had once been scalloped, but was now frayed with wear, and of course the ever-present feather bobbing brightly from a green felt cap. But most recognizable of all, even from that distance, was the expression on his face, wide-eyed, grinning, joy, each individual freckle on his sunburnt cheeks dancing as he surveyed the land, gesturing here and there to point out different landmarks, to a clammy tentacle of dread clutched at Tinkerbell's throat. Before she could properly react, Erica squealed, It's Peter! He's back! And it was Peter, of course. Tinkerbell would have recognized his silhouette if her eyes were closed. The problem was, it wasn't only Peter. There was also a human girl. She was plain, such that the fairy could scarcely believe this mousy, frail, frightened creature had been the cause of Peter's nighttime flights of fancy. Literally. She wondered what he'd been doing, of course, vanishing into thin air once he thought the coast was clear, not returning until well after the sun began to bleed streaky orange-gold across the horizon. There was a glint to him, too. Then, like the essence of London, had somehow seeped into him in a fundamental molecular way, and finally, when his shadow had gone missing, she almost laughed, thinking how he tried to play it off, as if he truly thought she wouldn't notice a person's shadow, just up and gone. He'd left it, or lost it, in London. And there she was, the person, the girl human on whom Peter had been calling all those nights away. And perhaps Tink had no claim to him. In fact, whatever claims she'd made, they surely involved at least one layer of omission. But that certainly didn't mean she needed to be pleased about this girl's arrival, with her strange, lumpy human shape, so graceless as she flew. Flew! Tinker Bell's throat tightened, for indeed the girl, clumsy though she was, nevertheless was gliding alongside Peter. Tink noted that her skin was sallow, like the experience of flight did not agree with her. Well, of course, it was in it to her. Humans had no pixie dust to illuminate them from within. But that being so, how could this one be flying without pixie dust? It was simple. She couldn't. Not even the great and all-clever Peter Pan could pull that off on his own, which meant one thing. He had found some pixie dust and helped himself to it. He had taken hers. Tinker Bell swooned briefly before attempting to harness the dark swirl of her emotions. For once, she felt the full weight of her inability to hold more than one emotion at a time, and she mourned that shortcoming. Surely there was a nuance, a specificity to the sensation of feeling simultaneously jealous, envious, angry, betrayed, and outraged. But to Tinker Bell just then, those gradations of turmoil swept over her like a brush fire, instant and all-consuming. He'd stolen a piece of her magic and given it to this thing that was flying at them, pale-faced and droopy and unremarkable. And she had been feeling bad for her deceit, and as she and Peter grew closer, she believed them to be developing a bond. What a fool she'd been. "What is that?" hissed Shallan as Peter and his guests approached. "And is it wearing night clothes?" Tink nodded. Yes, because Peter had been visiting her at night in London, which was where he'd misplaced his shadow, though there it was, casting a long tail beneath him as he soared down toward the lagoon. Revolting, the whole of it. Tink cast a baleful look at the shadow, as if it were to blame for this disastrous turn of events. The shadow raised a hand and playfully thumbed its nose at her. She stomped her foot, not feeling at all playful, and turned to the mermaids, who were each graining to get a better look at Peter and his companion. Peter brings with him a girl creature from the city. She practically spat the words, so distastefully were they. "Is it wicked?" Erica asked. "It looks wicked." "The wickedest. It would kill and eat a fairy as soon as it would look at one," Tink said. Not necessarily the truth, but no matter. The important thing was that the mermaids recognized this girl as the intruder she was, and were prepared to defend themselves and Neverland from her. As Peter and the girl came into land, Tink could see that her face had gone a disturbing shade of green. She looked disinclined to eat anything solid, much... Stop it, Quinn. Stop it. Much less the fairy. But Tink wasn't about to change tactics. Not when the mermaids were such a captive audience. "Peter, you're back!" Penelope exclaimed, swimming up to him with a bright wave. Even her distrust of the newcomer couldn't dampen her enthusiasm. She narrowed an eye at the human. "But who is this?" "Or what?" Erica asked. "It looks wicked. And why ever is it wearing night clothes, pray tell?" The human's face flushed. She held out a slender arm as though she meant to shake hands. Tink glared at her and folded her own arms across her chest. "I'm Wendy, darling, of Kensington Gardens, London, England," she added. like Tinkerbell were some kind of uncultured starling fairy who'd never heard of a far-off land so grand and well-known as England. "And I am in my nightgown," this Wendy thing went on, clearly nervous, though also a bit haughty. "But only because it was the only way to get away, to come visit Neverland, you see. Peter could only take us at night, while our parents were out. John and Michael and mine. Those are my brothers," she realized she was rambling, although she tilted her head to the sky. "I suppose it's not last night anymore, and so again, I really must apologize for being so indecent." "You really must," Erica agreed. Wendy blinked. "Well, I do. I apologize." For a delightful moment, everyone was very, very quiet, and all that could be heard was the ripple of water against sand. It was terribly awkward, and this Wendy girl looked as though she was regretting coming to Neverland. "Good," thought Tink. "Go back to London and leave Peter to us, and my pixie dust to me." At last, Peter stepped forward. The journey from London seemed only to have made him more robust, unlike poor, wan little Wendy. He was a compact, agile boy who radiated verve even on his worst days. But the gleam in his eyes right then was the afterglow of a long night's adventure. He threw his arms open and laughed. "I think she's waiting for you to accept her apology." "We know," Erica said, still curt. "I'm thinking about it." Wendy looked at Peter, mouth open. He shrugged. "They're thinking about it." Tink watched as Wendy eyed Peter. "Well, to be honest, I don't think there should be very much to think about," she protested. "Well, to be honest, we don't really care what you think. We think you're a guest in our home, and not a very polite one." Shalane rose up to her tallest height from the water. Elegant though she was, it was an intimidating sight. "This is all getting a little," Peter started, realizing tension were elevating. "It's the Wendy bird's fault," Tinkerbell said. "She didn't mention the pixie dust. Surely he knew she knew." "Don't be that way, Tinkerbell," he admonished. That little fairy just spoke to you? What did she say?" Wendy looked astonished and thrilled. Normally, Tinkerbell adored when others gazed at her with astonishment and thrill. But right then, she was focused on the fact that Wendy couldn't understand her. Unlike all the others in Neverland, of course, Wendy hadn't been in Neverland when she and Hook performed their translation spell. Now she'd never know what Tink was thinking unless Tink wanted her to. Perfect. She darted toward Penelope, whispering in her ear, then wove toward Shalane and Erica to fill them in. She glanced at Peter quickly, but he was preoccupied with admiring his shadow in the morning sunlight, contorting his limbs into creative shapes just to watch the patterns play against the sand. "Peter's right," Penelope cut in. "Everything's getting a bit heated." "I agree," Wendy said, relieved. "Why don't—" But whatever she planned to say next, the others were never to hear it. Together the mermaids leapt, arcing gracefully out of the water, grabbing Wendy and pulling her back toward the lagoon. Startled, Wendy shrieked. "Put me down," she demanded. "I'm not dressed for swimming." "Frankly, you're not dressed for mixed company," Penelope pointed out, wrapping her hands tightly around Wendy's wet wrist as she struggled. It happened so quickly, Peter barely had time to react. A splash and another shout from Wendy. "Peter, help!" Finally, he looked away from his shadow. He jumped up, twirling in midair, and dipped down toward the waves. "Wendy!" He dove for her, grabbed her elbow, but the mermaids had wrapped themselves around her remaining limbs and joined her panic as she thrashed underwater. Bubbles rose as she became more frantic. Tink dove toward the Millie, lighting her path like a bioluminescent reef. By the glow of her otherworldly sparkle, she could just make out Wendy's desperate expression as she wrenched her arms from the mermaids and fought her way back to the surface. And there, of course, was Peter, cutting sharply through the water and wrapping his arms around the only unclaimed part of Wendy's body, which was her torso, as his hands clasped just over her navel. Tinkerbell's vision went red. "Not now," she told herself. "Stop the Wendy thing. Peter is altogether too wrapped up in this creature. It would not stand." And if the fairy had her way, neither would the human. But it wasn't just Tinker Bell's vision going red. It was Wendy's face as she strained, short of breath. Peter gave a great tug and wrenched her free, sending the mermaids recoiling back, barreling into each other and bouncing off in every direction, churning up great swirls of water all around them. Tinker Bell took advantage of the chaos and fluttered, legs, wings, arms, heart, straight up and behind Wendy. She grabbed the girl's ponytail and yanked as hard as she could. She could feel the force of Wendy's teeth as they clattered together. Immediately, Tink let go of Wendy's hair and flew toward land, hovering as casually as she could muster, as Peter broke the surface with his pet human in tow. Wendy didn't look very good at all. No longer red or green, but a molted gray, skin puckered, eyes closed. She barely stirred as Peter laid her gently down on the bank. "Wendy," he said, voice hoarse. "Come on, the mermaids were just playing around. They didn't mean anything by it. They get a little, territorial when someone new comes to visit." Charlene swam up. "Don't blame us. She's the intruder. She's my guest," Peter protested, but he was more concerned with Wendy's complexion, which wasn't improving. He rested his palms flat against her cheeks. "Come on," he said again. Gently, he tilted her head first to one side, then the other. "Breathe now." When she didn't respond, he propped her up at the waist, wrapping lightly between her shoulder blades. "Wendy!" "I'm sure she's just playing," Erica said. "Humans have notoriously bad sense of humor." "Don't you mean mermaids?" Peter snapped. Just then, Wendy sputtered, sitting up straighter and reaching to brace herself on her own. She shook her head and coughed again, more forcefully, spewing an impressive fountain of water onto the sand. "Wendy, you're okay," Peter hugged her. "I seem to be," she said. "No thanks to them." She shot a look at the mermaids. "My goodness," Penelope retorted. "You're fine." "We were only trying to drown her," Erica said with a snort. The other two chuckled, and even Peter's lips twitched for a moment, though only a moment. Not Tinker Bell, though. She laughed until sparkly pixie dust tears rolled down her face. "She's lucky it wasn't worse." Wendy glanced at her, knowing she was being spoken ill of, but still unable to decipher fairy speak, and unwilling to ask for a direct translation. "Good," Tink thought. "If this is how you're going to welcome my friend, I'll just take her to meet the Lost Boys," Peter said. "Wendy and her brothers will be staying with us for a while." Tinker Bell's laugh caught in her throat. "A while?" What was a while? And since when were droopy new humans allowed in Neverland? Since when was Tinker Bell's companionship not enough for Peter? Tink flew toward Peter, assuming she'd follow them to the hideout at Hangman's Tree. But Peter held up a hand. "Just Wendy and me. For now." Had he spotted her underwater? Had he seen her pull Wendy's hair? Tink fumed. Very well. She watched as the two flew off, looking for all the world like they'd been doing so forever. Have it your way. It occurred to her that Hook had been waiting for her, to give the go-ahead for some time. But for one reason or another, Tinker Bell had been putting off taking the next step in his plot against Peter Pan. Peter was charming, and Tinker Bell, it seemed, had fallen for his considerable charms. And to what end? To be cast aside the moment a shiny new plaything arrived on the scene? Yes, Peter Pan, have it your way, because soon Captain Hook and I will have it our own. I'm ready at last. Are you?